Welcome. I'm Leslie Canham.
I'm Mary Gavoni.
I'm Linda Harvey.
I'm Olivia Wan, and together we are the Compliance Divas.
Welcome to the Compliance Divas podcast. We are so excited today to bring in a fabulous guest. Each one of the divas has had a personal experience with Miss Catherine Eitel-Belt, who is just an amazing international speaker, communication coach, and the founder and CEO of LionSpeak, which is a company that's dedicated to teaching unscripted, consistently exceptional communication skills. And Catherine is actually a dental consultant at heart. We've met her at dental consultant gatherings in the past. So she's one of us in dentistry, and she understands what we go through in a typical dental day. And today we are going to have Catherine show us how to create crystal clear leadership and inspire our team members to action every time we speak to build a stronger practice, an empowered team, and of course, a safer dental visit for every single patient. And before we begin, as the Compliance Divas, we bring clarity and simplicity to compliance by navigating the regulatory environment to keep you on course. We encourage our listeners to subscribe to the Compliance Divas podcast through their favorite podcast channel or go to our website, thecompliancedivas.com. Resources that we mentioned during our podcast can be found on our website, thecompliancedivas.com, and we love questions. Also, please submit your questions to support@thecompliancedivas.com. So, Catherine, thank you so much for being here with us on the Compliance Divas. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's so much fun for us all to be together. Glad to be here.
Well, I'll tell you, being compliant and holding team members accountable to systems and protocols is something that I think every dental office can agree is a very important part of making a dental practice cohesive. And there are sometimes things that come up when we set up our systems that defeat the systems. What are some of the elements that have to be in place, in at least your opinion, for setting up an infection control coordinator for successful conversations with the team? Typically, we have one person who leads the way with infection control, but not always has the ear of the entire team. What can you help us with?
Well, I think the one thing that anybody in a leadership position in a dental practice or any company needs would be the skills to have courageous conversations and coaching conversations. Because in a leadership position, and particularly for a compliance coordinator who will be coaching people to high levels of excellence when it comes to compliance, infection control compliance, we want to make sure that they know how to have those conversations in a way that uplifts people, gets them highly trained, and creates relationship trust, some equity with that, so that when things go awry, they can have a coaching conversation without tearing people down and without damaging the relationship. So I think that is the one skill. And Leslie, is so interesting because most of us didn't learn these skills at home. So some of us are lucky we had parents or grandparents that showed us a beautiful model of how to handle conflict, but most of us didn't. And many of us, or I would venture to say most of us, didn't take a class in how to have courageous conversations successfully, non-judgmentally, and with a high level of competency. And yet we put people in leadership positions and we just expect them to magically know how to do it. And so if you're an owner or an office manager and you've elevated someone to this position, I'd highly recommend getting them training on how to have these conversations.
Catherine, that is so important. I know Mary has some questions for you regarding compliance and courageous conversations.
Absolutely. First, I just want to say, Catherine, this feels like a family reunion of sorts.
It does.
It's so great to have you here. And I love what you said about making sure that if you elevate this person to the position, that they have some coaching, because they're probably going to need to have many courageous conversations, especially about someone who is not compliant, perhaps not packaging the instruments correctly or using the surface disinfectants correctly, because they have their own way of doing things. And what we need in a dental office is consistency. So how do they have that courageous conversation if somebody isn't in compliance?
Yeah, well, this is the very short flyover. We train for, hours on this. So in the time we have, I'm just going to give you a high level view. You need two things. You need a mindset shift internally for you as the deliverer of this, the instigator of this conversation. And you also then need a skill set when you actually open your mouth. And they're in that order for a reason, because I'm a believer that the words we choose, our tone of voice, our facial expressions and body language that all make up this complete conversation emanate from what we think, what we believe is true. And so I often say to audiences or trainees, I could give you the 4-step formula for having a courageous conversation right now really easily. It's actually not that hard. But if you used it on a negative or weak emotional mindset, a weak emotional platform, it wouldn't work. And it'd be tempting to blame the framework. So I'll give you the short version of both. For the mindset piece, I would ask your audience listeners to remember the acronym GECKO, GECO. And that is a quick little internal scan of where you are before you initiate the conversation with your the employee or the teammate that you're wanting to have this conversation with. So here's what it stands for. The G stands for reminding yourself that this conversation, this quote unquote conflict or disconnect of consistency is a gift. It's a gift. It's not a threat. It's not a foregone conclusion that it's going to be hard. So remember that it's a gift to you, because without it, you don't get to build these skills. You don't get to practice getting better at this. You need these little missteps to be able to continue to get better. So it's a gift. It's a gift to them, because if you do it well, you get to demonstrate for the future that when I come to you with a compliance issue, we're likely to have a really rich, good conversation. And you get to share that gift with them or prove to them that there is a better way to have these conversations. And I would say, Mary, that it's a gift to the world, because as more and more of us go out and have these kinds of conversations, we show the world that's certainly in need of conflict conversations that go well. We show them some examples of how to stand for something better. So it's a gift. The second E stands for expect it to go well. Even if you've had negative interactions in the past, or you found them in the past to be defensive, or you found them in the past to be passive aggressive, go into it expecting that this time, with a new set of skills, you coming from a new mindset, that this has the high potential to go well, better than before. Go in with that expectation. The C, put a star by this one, circle this one. This one's the most important. The C stands for choice, meaning remember that both parties are always at choice, you and them. Here's what that means. Nobody has to do anything. That's a hard statement for compliance experts to wrap their arms around. And what I mean by that is nobody has to work in this practice. There are lots of practices where they could work, practices that have different standards, practices that do things differently. We can choose to employ someone or not employ someone, to spend and invest on their training or to not do that. So what I'm trying to say is, if you go into the conversation remembering there are no victims here, nobody's being forced. What we're going to do in this conversation is invite them to come into this standard. We're inviting them to a clarified definition of what the standard is to be able to continue to work here on this team. And we're inviting them to join us. We're saying, we want you on our team. And we're inviting you, if you continue to walk over the threshold of the practice every morning, you're basically raising your hand saying, I sign up for these standards. And it's our invitation to you. But we leave it in your corner, and we trust that if it doesn't work for you, you have the power to make a different decision to work under a different standard. And we respect that and we honor that. That's a very mature way to come into the conversation. So you're not forcing someone to do anything. You're actually you're not demanding, you're inviting them in to our standard. And my job is just to clarify what the decision is. And so that's very different. It's a very different mindset. And lastly, O stands for be open to any solution that would satisfy the standard and work for the other person. Any solution that would satisfy the standard and work for the other person. Just be open to that. So gecko, important mindset. Then you go in to the skill set. And the skill set, like I said, is super simple. We're going to actually, in light of the time we have, we're going to provide that skill set for the conversation as one of our free takeaways from our podcast today. So, but that mindset piece is it's like the concrete of a building. It's the foundation that you build this conversation on. And if it isn't strong, then it often goes off the rails quickly.
Oh, Catherine, that makes such good sense. And it's probably why many of these infection control coordinators hate having those conversations, or they avoid them because they have the mindset and the expectation that it isn't going to go well.
Right. And I think that's rightfully so, because it probably hasn't, because we haven't trained them. In their defense, we haven't trained them to have these conversations. Most of us didn't get that training, and yet we've been put in these positions. So of course, any of us would avoid or really resist any conversation that we continued to have that did not end well. So of course, it makes sense. So I'm just here as encouragement that you can learn very quickly. You can learn how to do this better and it is weird, Mary. It is weird that I actually lean in and look forward to these conversations. But it's only because I've had so much time in this work, and they have gone so well for me, both personally and professionally, because the skills are the same. And when you have that level of success, you start to actually look forward to surprising people at how well these conversations can go. And that's what we're trying to champion. Yeah.
That's amazing information, Catherine, but we've got a real twister for you.
Okay,
Linda has a
good.
question
Good.
for you.
Bring it on, Leslie.
Linda, take it away.
All right, so here I go, Catherine, and I'm going to echo the sentiments too. We're so happy to have you today. So, we've been talking about the team members being the one who are non-compliant, and what happens when it's the doctor? How does someone have a courageous conversation with their boss who writes their paycheck and, keeps them hired and all this? Tell us, can you give us some tips or insights on that?
Absolutely. That is a good one. It seems really scary. And again, understandably, like you said, they're writing our checks, they've employed us, they've hired us, they can fire us. I would say a couple of things. I take that on as such a fabulous challenge. So again, Gecko applies here. Consider it a gift. Expect it to go well. Remember that it's your chance to really, really practice these skills. But here's a couple of extra things. I always say you can have courageous conversations down the ladder with someone who reports to you or looks to you for leadership. You can have a courageous conversation with people vertically who are on the same level of leadership as you. And you can have a courageous conversation with someone who is on the top rung of the ladder or above you, on maybe an office manager that is who you report to. The skills are the same, but there are a couple of extra considerations going up the ladder. One is to remember that people don't do things, they don't change or do things differently for our reasons. People do things differently for their own reasons. So a really smart communicator is going to explore first, what does this person want? What does my boss want? What is important to them? Is it important to them? Let's just say, for an example, let's say that the team has identified a company value. Often we see a company value might be excellence or integrity or strong communication. And they've already identified those, and the owner has talked to the team that these are the company's values. So if I were going to take this to a boss, I would say, I wanted to talk to you about something that seems to be at odds with one of our company values. And I wanted to first to identify or to clarify how important that value is to you. So the value I'm thinking of is integrity. And I want to, in specific, I want to talk about how integrity plays out in our infection control standards and everyday practices. And if the boss says, well, of course that's important to me, I wouldn't have that value if it wasn't important to me, then I would say, I'm so glad to hear that. And I'm glad that we agree, because I agree it's important. And so I'm curious what that means to you. And I would explore, like, what's the definition in terms of the employer's perspective? How do they define that? Well, let's say the owner says, well, to me, it means we do what we say we're going to do. Well, now you can see I have this agreement that we both agree it's important that people on our team do what they say they're going to do. So I would say, I'm so glad that we agree. And in that agreement, I've seen some places where it could feel like or seem like or look like to the team that we're not walking our talk, that we're not. And I know I'm pleased to know that you consider that a high level value. So I'd like to explore ways that we could work together to close that gap so that nobody on the team questions the integrity of our standards for infection control. Would you be willing to partner with me, or would you be willing to explore with me ways we could close that gap? So you start to see how I'm going in expecting it to go well. I'm not judging. I'm just saying, can we find a place where we agree? And then can we work together to close the gap there? So make sure you remember, people don't do things for our reasons, they do them for theirs. So if the employer, let's say the employer has been frustrated that people aren't doing things they want them to do, that the boss wants them to do. So again, I might go and say, so if that's of concern to you, then would you agree, Dr. Smith, that if we could be the example of A, coming clean when we've made a mistake, and B, rectifying that mistake, we are setting the example for how we expect them to own their mistakes and to rectify their mistakes. Would you agree that would be? And if that boss agrees with that, it's almost irrational not to agree, right? So if the boss agrees with that, then you can say, great, then I'd love to explore a place where I think we could do that. I think we could, say to the staff, we noticed that there were a few things that we were doing that weren't in compliance, and we wanted to just come clean about that and to say, we're aware of it, we're working on changing that, you're going to notice some changes in the future. And I wanted to reiterate that it's important that we agree on the standards here and that everyone, including me, complies with those standards until they're changed. And so when owners can stand up and, it's so funny, Linda, I'll often ask managers and owners, what are the characteristics of employees that you like, spectacular employees? If you were going to hire the most spectacular employee, what characteristics would they have? And they'll often say things like self-starter and dependable and a high level of accountability, things like that. And so I always say, then if those are the traits we want in our employees, we have to be the shining examples of those. If we want people to take and be accountable, then the best thing we can do is have the courage to be vulnerable enough to show where we have made mistakes and to show them that we're on it. We're not wallowing in it. We're on it. We recognize it and we're correcting it. And when we do that frequently, people on our team see that it's okay to say, I screwed up here. I made a mistake and I own it and I'll correct it. So I think just coaching your owner on, going in carefully and find a place where you agree and see if you can tie it to something they want. If they want higher accountability on their team, you can tie this conversation to helping them get that. And they'll make a change for something they want, not necessarily for something we want.
Oh my gosh, Catherine, I'm just sitting here nodding my head like crazy. Yes. I hope that our listeners today play this podcast back for that. The whole podcast is going to be invaluable. But the piece that everything you just went through was so priceless. And just of all the things that popped out of me, how can I just pick but one or two? But I like the words, I'm curious. I'll never forget a speaker. I think it might have been a physician that I heard at one of my risk management conferences talking about preventing medical errors and in synchronizing things with team members. I'm curious. Why are you doing this? I'm curious. So that way you don't come across with those negative statements, can't do that. Don't do that. You shouldn't do all those negative things that come across as judgmental. And
That's
then
right.
the words, would you agree?
Yeah.
Would you
agree? Because if we can get on a place of agreement, then we launch into the disconnect. We launch into the conflict from a place of agreement rather than from a place of disagreement. It's a much stronger platform to launch the conversation from. So work toward that. The other thing is to listen first, talk second. So if I'm taking it to my boss or anyone really on that ladder, you want to remember that you want to set the context to say, I'd like to talk to you today about something I've observed that I feel is a gap in our infection control standards. And in particular, it's about how we're using the autoclave or how we're sterilizing the surfaces. Set the context, but before you go into your point of view about what you want to be different, before you do that, ask them, I'm curious, and I have some ideas about it, or I have some requests around it. That's a good way to put it. But before I identify those requests, I'm curious how you think it's going in terms of sterilizing our counters, or how do you think it's going in terms of using the autoclave? Because whatever they say will be useful to you. If they say, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I know I haven't been doing very well. I know I have got to pick this up and get better, and I'm sorry, and I'm on it. Well, my gap is really small because they already agree this is a problem. And so now I can go into that knowing that it's a really small gap I have to jump. But if they say, I don't know what you're talking about, I've always done it right. Why are we even having this conversation? Well, my gap is really big. When would you like to know that? Would you like to know the gap is big or small at the beginning of your conversation or at the end of your conversation? So set the context if you're taking the conversation to someone. But then once you set the context, don't be seduced into wanting to talk it out just yet. Stop and say, so around this topic, I'm curious, how do you think it's going? And assess the gap and then walk in. Better to get that up front.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Catherine, again. Leslie, back to you.
I think Mary had some very interesting questions. And of course, Linda had one of the great questions, but Olivia has some questions about timing that we'd like to hear from you about. So Olivia, would you take it from here?
Well, Catherine, we love how you frame these sample conversations. And I've actually been looking at your website as you've been speaking, and it's very robust, very interesting. So thank you for joining us. But I'm really curious, Catherine, is it better to confront someone at that moment, or should you wait to the end of the day after the patients have left, or should you approach that person in the presence of others during a team meeting? When do you think that conversation should take place?
Well, that is an excellent question because timing is everything, Olivia. Timing is everything in terms of conflict and courageous conversations. So my answer to this is it depends. And it depends on a couple of things. One, I would assess these three things. When I notice it happening as a compliance manager, I would assess it in the moment, at that moment, do I have time available to actually have a satisfying conversation? In the midst of patient care, the answer will often be no, right? The answer will often be no. Now, this assumes this is not a life-threatening predicament, right? But in terms of an infraction, if I did not have adequate time, and assuming the safety of the patient, I would probably wait. The second thing I would assess is, even if I did have the time, is the energy between us and the relationship capital I have. So for example, if we just yesterday had an argument that didn't go well, the relationship capital we have today is low. But if we had a courageous conversation yesterday, or maybe this person observed a courageous conversation yesterday that went really well, then I would anticipate that our energy would be good and the relationship capital would be high. And those would all be indicators that you could have it right in that moment and it would go well. The third thing I would assess is the importance of the evaluation of the learning opportunity here. So if this appears to be one person's issue, then I think doing it at the end of a day or the beginning of the next day, I would probably query that person to say, I'd like to talk to you about this. Would the end of the day today be a good time? Would tomorrow, or would lunchtime tomorrow be good? When would be good for you, right? But if this is something that all of a sudden I see it and I realize we may never have clarified this for everyone, then I would absolutely put it on the list of the team meeting to say, and I want to make it really clear here, it never benefits anyone to embarrass someone in front of a group. That is never a good tactic. And so what I would do is say, I want to thank Sarah, because in my observation last week, I noticed that Sarah had a different way of sterilizing the counters, or did something different than what our standard is. And Sarah, I want to thank you for creating an opportunity that showed me that I may not have been as clear in the training as I had hoped to be. And I appreciate that you gave me the opportunity to see that and to make that right today. Do you see how that leadership technique is? I'm taking responsibility for potentially not being clear and potentially not training people as well as we could have. And so if a good trainer is going to know that I can't just say it once and everybody nods their head and that means everybody's got everything. It's likely we're going to have to repeat, because, you know, in infection control, it's very detail heavy. There's a lot to remember. And so I think that's important. So those would be my things. Just avoid embarrassing anyone, assess the time available, assess the energy and relationship capital, and the importance of a bigger learning opportunity for the team, and then make your decision. Because any of those times could work given how you assess those three things.
So I like how you use the word assessment. So if you're assessing that situation rather than reacting right away,
Yes.
that's some
Yes.
really good points, Catherine. And I hope it helps our listeners in working with their teams. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Well, Catherine, I want to just recap some of the high points of this fabulous information, because it's so much that our listeners are really getting a gift from you in understanding how they can have these courageous conversations. And I heard you tell us that it's really our mindset first, that we need to shift internally, and we have to be careful of how we choose our words, what our facial gestures are, and our body language. I remember one time working with a dentist, and we could tell when he was mad because the veins in his neck would pulsate. So we knew somebody was in trouble. We also want to have the skill set to be able to communicate with people on our team. And I love the acronym that you've given us, GECKO. And I'm excited that we're going to be able to take that information with us, because you have an offer surrounding that particular acronym and a sheet that people can refer to. But as I recall, you said that G stands for it's a gift. So when someone messes up, they don't disinfect the surfaces the proper way. They're not following the manufacturer's directions. It's a gift to us to see that now there's a place for improvement. Maybe I didn't explain it properly. Maybe this person came from a different practice where they did things differently. So it's a gift. And then also expect, breathe deeply and expect this to work well. So when I confront this individual surrounding disinfecting the surfaces, I'm going to expect that they're going to be grateful for the information, and that they're going to have a change come about, and it's going to be a good change for everyone. The C stands for choice. Everyone has a choice to buy into the practice's culture of safety or not. And so I heard you say when you cross over the threshold, you automatically agree to follow the policies and the procedures of this practice. You have a choice not to, but that means this practice and you are not a good fit. So people have choices. And of course, be open to hear. Somebody may have a reason for why they're doing it this way. They may have read the manufacturer's directions on the disinfectant, and they found that there's a better way to do it that perhaps we didn't know about. Maybe we're a little old school. So be open and be listening for potential solutions that other people have. And then I know that the hard question that Linda asked about approaching your boss, if their boss is the offender, and I've seen that many times myself, where there's some cross-contamination that goes on, to get agreement about what's important to the boss, and then take the conversation into the specifics of what it is after you have agreement that our culture of safety and infection prevention means that we always wash our hands when we take our gloves off. And I'm guilty of it myself, doctor, but every now and then I get busy, with the final dismissal conversation with the patient, and I've forgotten to wash my hands when I take my gloves off. But it's probably a good idea for us to fess up to the team that this is something we do, and we're going to improve it. We all need to watch each other, and we expect that not only am I going to be making these changes, but we expect the team to be excellent when it comes to infection control. Olivia's question on the timing, which is, sometimes timing can be because I'm procrastinating in approaching someone with something that I feel that they may not feel like they want to hear this feedback, that they don't feel like I'm coming to help them, but rather that I'm coming to disappoint them. So we do have to ask ourselves, do we have the time for this conversation in the moment? Is it something that needs to be addressed immediately? Is it a patient safety issue? Do I have to address it? What's the energy between us? We have some bad juju going on from a conversation, or are we in pretty good in spirits with each other? And of course, we never want to embarrass someone by calling someone out and pointing out the deficiencies. I like to think of that as we point out the things that we're doing well. We're washing our hands with the right products long enough. We're always doing it, but we may not be doing that immediately after we take our gloves off. So we're talking about these things in a spirit of making the improvement. And at that, I think I've covered the high points, and I just thought I'd just test the water with the other divas and see if they had anything else to share about either horror stories or heroes when it comes to infection control and conversations. Linda, you have something you wanted to add.
Leslie, I just wanted to mention that Catherine, when you were talking about the coaching and the relationship of trust, what we all agree with you, that's just so important. And from the risk management side, and even as an attorney, maybe Olivia's worked with some cases like this. If the team member is not careful in how they're handling, they're not using a coaching approach, it can come across as bullying in the work and the practice, as far as, trying to bully somebody into making a change and doing it, quote, the right way or their way, which may not be the right way either. And that's so important to look at that positive side, as you said, come with it with a positive approach. And I think the training is critical for us to kind of get out of any negativity that we might be in, because we come to work and we bring things on our mind, or things that have, crazy traffic in the morning or whatever's going on. And we have to make sure we can leave that aside and focus on those positive, courageous conversations.
Yes, yes, they absolutely can happen. And I think it does emanate from the top. So when you've set a clear vision as an owner and an office manager about what you want this practice to represent and be founded on, then your managers, especially your compliance manager or coordinator, then gets to get out of the hot seat. They get to say, let's say the person with the infraction, they get to say, both of us were at the meeting where our owner clarified the standards. You remember that meeting? And if the person says, yes, of course I do, then I would say, then what I want to reiterate is these are not necessarily my standards. What my job is to take the standards that our owner has set forth and to invite you into those, and to make sure you have all the resources, all the training, all the support to meet them, or to help you decide you don't want to meet them, and then we'll see what our next step is there, right? We respect that you have a brain and a mind, and my job is just to help you with compliance, should that be what you want to do to continue to work here. And so I'm becoming your advocate rather than your disciplinarian. That's a very different position to be in. And I think if you can start to think of yourself that way, you get out of the bad guy seat and you get into the coach seat. And that's a very, very different seat to sit in and to speak from.
Mary.
That was so well said, Catherine. And something else that happens, I think, frequently is that the doctor or the office manager will elevate someone to that position of infection control coordinator, but they don't back them up. And they may throw them under the bus as well. Oh, yeah, she's just a stickler for that. It doesn't matter. So then they undermine that. So there's got to be that mindset from the beginning. If I'm going to be the infection control coordinator, then the people on the upper rungs of the ladder better have my back.
Yeah, and I've helped coordinators go to their office manager and say, would you like this conflict to go away? Would you like us to be able to move on to a more important? And if of course, they're going to say, yes, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of all this, then I say, great. Then the best way, the fastest way we can do that is for the team to feel that we are united in the standard. And I promise you that if we can come with that united front, and there is no, little hole in the armor there, then we can move on we can put this to rest and move on. If we can't, we'll be stuck here in a spiral that will go on for a very long time. So I'll leave it to you, office manager. I'll leave it to you, owner, to decide what you'd like for the future, right? Yeah.
Just amazing information. I wish we had an hour or two to go through all of these concepts. But what we have for our listeners is a couple of one sheets that have great information. Catherine, tell us about what you have, and I'll make sure that we put the link to get this information on the Compliance Divas website, as well as in our podcast show notes. So you have two different things to give to our listeners.
Actually, I've added, I have 4 things, but they're all in one download. So I have 4 free giveaways. The link is lionspeak, lionspeak.net/courageous. lionspeak.net/courageous. When you go there, you can download 4 things. One is we call it our Courageous Conversations support sheet. So on one side, it has GECKO, and it explains what that acronym is. On the right side, it has ARCH, which is the actual framework for the conversation. We didn't have time to get into that today, but that's the crucial piece of the conversation. And then down below, it has 2 rules of engagement. Don't ever talk backwards about the past, always redirect to the future, and listen first, talk second. So those 2 little rules. I hope people print it out, put it on their bulletin board in their team room, hand it out at a team meeting, talk about it, practice it. It's my gift to the dental community. Please print it and use it. The other things that are in that download are, there's one sheet called the 4 reasons, and it's the 4 reasons people don't do what we want them to do. And it is in order. So my theory is that we often go to reason number 4 first, before we've actually checked off the first 3. And so it's a very helpful tool. And then also I have a list of powerful questions, which helps you to get in the right mindset. And again, great staff meeting conversation piece. And lastly, there's an article that I've written on courageous conversations. So all 4 of those things are in there, and our gift from Lions Speak to your listeners on the Compliance Divas. I'm so grateful to have been here with you.
I can't wait to get to that information myself. Catherine, you are a great communicator. You have helped all of us here at the Compliance Divas be great communicators ourselves, and we so appreciate your polished pearls of wisdom. At the Compliance Divas, we bring clarity and simplicity to compliance by navigating regulatory compliance to keep you on course. And we hope our listeners will submit their questions to support@thecompliancedivas.com. Look for these great resources. If you didn't catch it from Catherine, you will find it on thecompliancedivas.com and also in the podcast show notes. Catherine, on behalf of the Compliance Divas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy conversing. Thank you.